are listening to Impact Hustlers, and I am your host, Maiko. I have made it my mission to inspire the next generation of entrepreneurs to solve some of the world's biggest social and environmental problems. And for this reason, I am speaking to some of the best entrepreneurs out there who are solving problems such as food waste, climate change, poverty, and homelessness. My goal is that Impact Hustlers will inspire you either by starting an impact business yourself, by joining the team of one, or by taking a small step, whatever that may be, towards being part of the solution to the world's biggest problems. Cool. Liam, it's really good to have you on Impact Hustlers. You co-founded something that's not the usual fit for Impact Hustlers, but I got really excited when I came across you. Usually, obviously, we always have entrepreneurs that work full-time on commercial startups that are out there building new technologies to solve social and environmental problems. And you co-founded AeroDelft, which is a student group, a non-profit student group, working on hydrogen-powered aviation. So I'm really excited to have somebody with a different background, different angle, talk about this future technology. And it's great to have you on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks very much. Glad to be here.
Great. So the first thing I thought is whenever I heard about student teams working on technology, usually I think of some student team working on solar-powered cars, stuff like that, and then kind of going for races somewhere, and they have to compete either with very little fuel or only with solar energy, stuff like that. I guess when you started AeroDelft, that was too boring for you to get into. Why did you start AeroDelft initially?
It's an interesting question. I actually originally started doing something completely different. I started designing human-powered submarines, which is a topic unto itself. Essentially, I mean, it deserves a lot more attention than it gets. It's a great sport. It's one of the student teams here in Delft, and essentially what you do is you build a 2.5 meter long tube, and you put someone in there who in a wetsuit, a cyclist, and stick him an oxygen bottle onto his back, and then he pedals as much as he can over 100 meters, and the fastest time wins. All while trying not to hit the walls or some slalom poles. It's pretty exciting, and that's one of the teams. So indeed, you said solar-powered cars. We have all sorts of teams here in Delft, and that's why I actually came to the TU Delft in the first place. They're called Dream Teams. And so the first year I was part of this human-powered submarine Dream Team, but there was no team doing anything with airplanes. And for me, I moved to Germany in 2013, and I started gliding. I know you're also a paraglider, as far as I remember.
Yeah, actually, yeah.
So it's
my first flight ever was in a sailplane, so actually in a glider plane, the ones that you're flying.
Yeah.
And I never made a license for that or anything like that. I was just a passenger, and now I'm doing paragliding, and I'm doing a private pilot license. So that's, I guess, one of the other angles why I'm so passionate about aviation and sustainable aviation.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I don't have to tell you how much fun it is to fly, of course, but that's what got me interested in flying in general. So I did that for a few years, and now also an instructor, so I get to teach people. That's been a very rewarding experience as well. And so when I came here to the TU Delft in 2016, I guess it was a case of making my hobby into a career, I guess, to study aerospace engineering. And so when I arrived at the Dream Hall, first making submarines, I figured out that that's not quite what I wanted to do. I wanted to go into the direction of aircraft, and it was a shame that there was no team there to build aircraft. And so it was at the back of quite a difficult exam, thermodynamics exam. A friend of mine went into the center of Delft, got a pizza, and came up with the idea. That was essentially it. We said, okay, we want to build a student team, we want to make aircraft, we want to give students the opportunity to actually do something practically, because what we thought was missing in the studies, which in my opinion it still is a real focus on sustainability. We're all as students aware that aviation is responsible for 2 to 3% of anthropogenic warming, but we weren't really given any opportunity to discuss what we could do about that. And maybe it's a bit naive of me to think that would happen in the bachelor's, the first year of a bachelor's, but we thought that why not make this something practical where we can actually build something or design something, build something, and then test it and show that we as students can also make an impact. So it then became a question, what do we want to do? You know, which direction do we want to go? What challenge do we want to face and solve? And we actually started with something that on the face of it seems a little bit odd. I guess also submarines. Everything's a bit odd about the story. But we started by drilling millions of holes into the wing of a plane. So these very, very small holes, diameter of 0.1 millimeters, we would laser into the wings, and then you would suck air through those holes. And by doing so, you force the flow over the wing to stay laminar, or to stay to not become turbulent, and therefore you reduce the amount of drag that your wing is producing by quite a lot. So in the gliding world, there was a study done on this, and we could increase our lift to drag ratio, essentially, a metric of efficiency of an aircraft. We could increase it by 10 points, which for a glider is substantial, and if you were to scale this up to a full-scale aircraft, could also have a major impact on emissions reduction. It was a bit of a crazy idea, and it's still in the works. We actually focused on something else in the end, because this proved to be quite a bit more difficult than what we were first hoping. But we hope to revitalize this, at least I hope to, this year. But we had a discussion. What do we want to do? We had this efficiency idea, this bounded layer suction system, as it's called. But it was part of a broader discussion that we were having, and I think the industry is also having, is what do we want to do going forward? Do we want to continue to improve our efficiency and therefore reduce fuel consumption and therefore reduce our impact on the environment, which we have been doing successfully in aviation for the last 100 years, for sure, especially since the 1980s, when we've actually increased our aircraft efficiency quite drastically. We've saved tons and tons and tons of CO2 since then. But we had a discussion between that. Okay, so efficiency is one thing, but why don't we go for a radical new approach? Why don't we change the fuel, fundamentally change how the aircraft is run, And we came to the conclusion that the biggest impact we could have is to change the fuel. So look at hydrogen. Specifically at liquid hydrogen, which is a problem in itself. It's stored at a very, very low temperature. We know how cold it can get. Some people will know minus 20, some people will know minus 40 outside temperatures. People might even know LNG, minus 180 degrees Celsius. We're talking about liquid hydrogen here is minus 250, which is less than 20 degrees Celsius warmer than absolute zero. It's maybe 10, 15 degrees warmer than space. It's quite a challenge, but it's what we feel, and what I think since we founded AeroDelft, the industry has started to recognize this as being one of the solutions to reducing the industry's impact on the environment. And so we went for liquid hydrogen. That was 3 and a bit years ago now, and we unveiled our prototype February of this year, 2021, which was very exciting, especially getting to see the aircraft for the first time, which took a while after the unveiling for me, unfortunately, because of the COVID regulations. It's a great experience, and it will fly this year, first electrically, then on gaseous hydrogen, which is easier to store, but we can't fly for as long. And then hopefully in the autumn/winter of 2021, we'll then fly on liquid hydrogen. So It's very exciting, and we sort of hope that by showing that this is possible, a bunch of students from the TU Delft can design a plane like this, that we could show that it is a feasible solution, and that companies who have a lot more money, a lot more experience, and also a lot more capacity to do these projects will actually also follow suit. And we see, liquid hydrogen powered passenger aircraft within the next 10 years. That's our goal.
Wow. I guess with that temperature, how can somebody that's not in engineering understand how you actually have to build the aircraft? Do you have to build like a massive flying fridge to be able to maintain the temperature of the liquid hydrogen? What are the engineering challenges that you have in building a plane that's powered by liquid hydrogen?
There are quite a few, and it's safe to say that there have not been any projects so far, or very, very few minor research projects that have been done so far on using that in aviation. We know the fuel from rocketry. Many rockets will use liquid hydrogen, they use liquid oxygen as their fuel. So knowledge is there, but it has not been used in the sense that we're using it, because we aren't combusting hydrogen. We're using hydrogen in a fuel cell. And as a result, the fuel cells have a very limited operating margin when it comes to temperature. So they don't like to run at very low temperatures, which means we have to bring the liquid hydrogen from its very low temperature to around about just over 0 degrees Celsius, from somewhere between 0 and 20 degrees Celsius. That's about where our fuel cell runs. There are also fuel cells that run at 1,000 degrees Celsius. So it is quite a range, but the one we're using is a PEM fuel cell, proton exchange membrane fuel cell, and that one will run. It can take hydrogen in between 0 and 20 degrees Celsius. It is quite a complex process. We don't actually actively cool the hydrogen. So generally speaking, there are two ways you could do this. If you see liquid hydrogen stored somewhere, it's actively being cooled. In our case, we will put it into the tank and let it warm, because we'll use that warming hydrogen to run the fuel cell. So we design the tank so that it works. There are quite a few challenges, though. It's quite an interesting. It's very interesting, and of course, safety is a huge part of it. I was interviewed on a radio station here in the Netherlands a while back, and the first thing that he said, he did a couple of intro questions. Then he just played the audio of the Hindenburg disaster and asked us, "Oh, but do you know what this is?" And we said, "Well, yeah, we know what this is, but what you're suggesting is that the technology hasn't gotten better since 1930s, and it's almost 100 years later." And that's just complete nonsense. We look at the technology we have now. We know how to store this safely, and it's safe to say that if we had any doubts about the safety, we would not be doing what we're doing. That's for sure. So we are working with people who have experience with hydrogen, and we're helping companies that maybe do not yet, but will be required in the chain, right? So we're bringing hydrogen to aircraft in the future, helping them get knowledge of this so that we can hopefully bring the infrastructure up to pace as quickly as possible.
Great.
Yeah, but quite a few challenges still to face.
To solve, yeah. What do you say to people that are kind of more passionate about battery-powered aviation, right? Obviously, the whole car industry is kind of moving that way. It seems like that is kind of the technology of choice, electric cars, and all the kind of big manufacturers are kind of focused on that right now. And obviously batteries are getting better. They may not be good enough right now, but maybe in 10 years time, they could be kind of good enough to power a plane. Have you considered that? And what would you say for people that think that there may be different technologies that are better suited for this?
Yeah, definitely. The interesting thing, and this is something that I think I personally have also learned over the last year or so. At the beginning of AeroDelft, we were trumpeting hydrogen. We still are. We believe that hydrogen has a major part is a major part of the future, not just for aviation, of course. Where we can use it. It's right now our economy is based on oil, and we've set everything up that way. But it is feasible at least in our opinion, and there have been enough studies that show that we could change our industry, change our society, and base it on hydrogen. So that's why we thought it should also be used for aviation. It's a lot more dense than energy dense than current fuels like kerosene, but it does have a volume problem. That's the big problem with hydrogen. So at the beginning of AeroDelft, we were saying, okay, hydrogen is the future. We always think about this, and I think for me personally, over the last year, I have figured out that there is no one single answer to any engineering challenge, and luckily that is the case. Otherwise, I think my job as an engineer in the future will be pretty boring. You definitely need to have there are different solutions to each problem, and we think about battery powers, think about hydrogen, think about sustainable aviation fuels. They will all play a major part in making aviation more sustainable. Batteries, especially, we have, I think we heard recently that a large proportion of vehicles sold here in the Netherlands last year were battery powered, were electric. And that's ever increasing. I think we'll see the same thing for airplanes, but there is a limit to how large the airplanes can get for batteries to be feasible at the current technology. Of course, if they improve, then maybe we'll see more. So I think what we'll see is the smaller aircraft, let's say, up to 10, maybe 19 passengers, perhaps powered by batteries, or maybe there's a hybrid electric option where you combust a sustainable aviation fuel. So a kerosene equivalent created with carbon capture of CO2 from the atmosphere, or another way. We might see hybrid electric or even just complete battery electric aircraft in the smaller segments. Anything larger than that, though, batteries no longer become feasible. So you essentially will have two options. Either we use hydrogen. We can use hydrogen as we're doing with the fuel cell, or we can use hydrogen and combust it, which would involve less new updates of the current aircraft or current engine designs that we have. And we also will see sustainable aviation fuels play a role. Right now, the latest report, European Union / McKinsey report on hydrogen aviation essentially says that anything up to a short to medium range aircraft, so think Airbus A320, Boeing 737 MAX, that sort of size aircraft, could be powered by hydrogen. It's more cost effective in the future to make those aircraft fly on hydrogen. If you're talking about longer range aircraft, at least until the year 2050 or so, we will probably see those powered by sustainable aviation fuels, such as biofuels or syn fuels, because it's more cost effective. When you have a very long distance flight, you will have to put a lot more fuel in, which means that the aircraft will have to be extended because of the volume problem with hydrogen. And of course, also, which I didn't even think about, but the refueling takes longer if you have more fuel. And so if you refuel even for 10 minutes more, you could jeopardize an entire flight for an airline in a day. So there's a lot of other considerations that we haven't even thought of yet, which will come into play. But I think their conclusion is that, and I think it's ours as well, that we'll see a substantial fleet replacement on hydrogen by the year 2050, which is for aviation, that's where the climate goals are. In the EU, they aim for net zero emissions. Globally, the Air Transport Action Group aims for half of the emissions than in 2005. But both of those are very difficult to achieve, but we're suggesting that about 40% of aircraft by 2050 will be hydrogen powered, and the rest will probably be powered by sustainable aviation fuels, or there'll also be, for the smaller segments, batteries. So it's we shouldn't bet on one horse. We have to have different solutions, and we're focusing on hydrogen, but it's great to see that others are focusing on other things. We need to see which one will become the most effective.
Great.
That's
that's
thing.
the approach to take anyways with green energy on the ground. And I think for any part of solving big problems, I think taking different approaches to it. So now you're actually not the only ones working on this. There's like some really big players in this now, right? So I think Airbus announced that they're working on hydrogen powered airplanes as well, and that they want to come out with something by 2035, I think.
Yes, exactly.
Who else is working on this, and how do you relate to the developments in the market? Do you see a lot more happening, or do you still think you can pioneer something that's maybe even Airbus can't get done, or maybe they're not even doing?
It's very interesting. Since we founded AeroDelft in, what was that, 2017, at the time we didn't see very much. There were very little. Some companies had said that they were interested and they were looking into the possibilities, but there were no, apart from one or two projects here or there, research projects mostly, there was nothing being said in the realm of hydrogen in aviation, publicly at least, or very little. Since we got started, I don't know, I'm not sure we could take the full credit for this. I think that would be a little bit overblown. But of course, since then, we've seen a lot more. Airbus has now said that the Zero E projects will power by hydrogen. They're looking both at fuel cells and combustion. And you're right, they're aiming at 2030, 2035 for first commercial aircraft, which makes sense also. If you look at the segments that they're aiming for, the last aircraft in, let's say, the short medium range segment was the A320 Neo and the 737 MAX. And it usually takes about 10, 15 years before the next cycle. So, or even 20 years sometimes. So if they were released back in 2015 or 2014, something like that, we'd expect new aircraft to come on the market in 2030. So that's what they're aiming for, to replace the aircraft that they're currently making. We see a lot of work, and it's very heartening to see that. But it is also very interesting because often when we talk to companies who we might want to be, might want to partner with and work on this at the same time, we realize how far ahead we are already. So it's quite interesting when we get questions about how are you doing this, because we know the answers as a student team from the TU Delft. Which is it's an interesting position to be in, because that's not how you'd expect it to be. But yeah, I mean, that's what we're here for. We do want to share what we're doing, because we're not here to make a profit. You know, we are a student team. We're a non-profit organization, so we're here with our partners together to show that it's feasible, and then also to give that knowledge on to people who are more able, or companies who are more able to put this into practice on a larger scale, because, I mean, that's not what we can't build passenger aircraft yet, maybe.
So
we'll
will you be open sourcing the technology in the end, or how is the model actually to kind of spread the technology you're working on?
Yes, we haven't decided yet how exactly we want to do that. Of course, we have our partners who have been helping us over the past 2 years, so the knowledge will mostly get passed through them. But of course, anything that we believe is vitally important will be shared, because we believe that that's our. So our motto is to fly in clean skies. We want to fly in clean skies. That's how the future looks like. So we want to do everything we can to make that happen. But we're not far enough yet that we have something that we could easily put down onto paper and give to people, or give to companies to say, this is how we do things, because we're still developing ourselves. So once we have an idea of what we have and what we have that other people may not, we'll then figure out how to pass it on most efficiently and most effectively for the future.
Got it. Let's talk a bit about the entrepreneurial journey as well, and some of the challenges around that, and kind of dive a bit deeper on that. First, I'd be keen to understand why you decided to set up AeroDelft as a non-profit student organization. Obviously, it may have happened in the context of what you were doing at the time as well, but even now, like, is there a reason you're not saying, okay, let's spin this out, make it into a commercial company, and be kind of the Tesla of aviation, and kind of mix up the market, get some investment? Why are you deciding to kind of have it as a student-run organization at the moment?
It's a good question, and it's a question that we have, that I personally, and I think a number of my colleagues have also thought. Why aren't we doing this commercially? I think it has a fairly simple answer, because it's essentially why we got this started. At the time, I didn't know very much about what I was talking about. I was a first year bachelor student, and when we're talking about aviation, it's not something you can just go into and without knowledge. So we needed a degree. So I think at the time there was no other choice for us. We needed to make this into a student team. But it's more than that. It's the reason we did it like this is because we wanted to provide students like ourselves the opportunity to do things practically. And you wouldn't get that as much with a startup or with anything commercial, because you then have to think about paying the people you work with, and also talk about investment. We didn't know what we were going into. Our original idea was to use boundary layer suction. The nice thing about being this sort of association, or this sort of being a non-profit, is that we can make decisions and go in a direction that we feel is the most effective at any given time. We, of course, have partners who we discuss what we were doing with, but they're a lot more open to changes, or because of problems that may come up, we think, okay, we'll do something a little bit differently, which we have that flexibility as a non-profit. And we have, which is a big bonus when you're working with this sort of technology. But mostly the reason is simply that we want to, as students, have an opportunity to do this whilst still studying, because we know that if you're doing a startup, you have to leave your studies. You have to focus full time on it, and that's not possible if you want to further your studies. I'm working my master's now, so there'd be it's not possible to do if this was commercial. But we do have ideas of spinning off potentially some startups from AeroDelft. But we want to get our plane flying first. That's the idea. And then the full-scale aircraft after that, which we will be receiving pretty soon, the airframe for. So we want to focus on that first. If that is successful, and we know it will be, then we'll think about the spin-offs in a bit more detail.
Yeah.
And it has also allowed us, as the founders or the first generation of the team, that's to have completed our studies to a level where we think we now know a little bit more about what we were talking about when we discuss this with people who've been in the industry for a long time.
Yeah,
that's the idea.
Got it. And then in your journey, you're about to actually fly your first prototype. You just revealed it recently. You're gonna kind of move quite fast in the next few months, and have made a lot of progress, right? But what would you say has been kind of the biggest hurdle for you to get there, and what may be like one of the biggest hurdles for you to still be able to progress going forward? This could be technology-wise, it could be funding, anything really. What do you think is kind of the biggest risk for you?
The biggest challenge, I think, up until this point has not been the technology. It hasn't been... I think the biggest challenge has been the fact that we're not a startup. So how we can get funding, how we can... because we need money, of course. It's not possible, even though we have a bunch of students who are doing all of this part-time, no one's being paid for this. We're all doing it for free, I guess, essentially. We're all working for this for free. And in that environment, it's very difficult to get funding from investors because there's no return of this project right now. We can't provide anything in return at the moment. In the future, maybe things will change. With a spin-off. We want AeroDelft to remain a student team, but maybe we come up with a spin-off or something like that. I think then, even though that's a whole different challenge, the funding problem is very different, because there you have a potential return on some investment. We've had to go through sponsorship, which is a very, very nice feeling when you're sponsored by someone, because of course they believe in what you're doing, and it makes them even more proud when you succeed, because they're not in it for getting a return. They're in it to see you succeed, and that's it's very nice, but it's also quite a challenge to gain that money in the first place, to show people that you mean what you're doing, and that you have a chance of succeeding when you had nothing to show in the first place. I do feel that now that we will have our prototype flying very soon, that things will become easier, because we've then proven ourselves that we are able to do what we said we would. Even though I think we were a little bit overly ambitious with our planning for the beginning of the project, we have shown that we're able to do something and make it happen. So I think the funding might get easier, but that's been, I think, the major roadblock, especially also going forwards with our full-scale aircraft, where suddenly it's not a linear progression in terms of size and money. It's quite a steep trajectory.
Yeah, so the first one is actually going to be a third of the final size, right? And it's going to be a remote control
third of the
prototype.
Size, but correct, yes. So it'll be 50 kilograms, wingspan of about 6 meters. It looks bigger than you'd expect from the photos. And it'll be powered by up to 1 kilogram of liquid hydrogen. And that kilogram can essentially let it fly for up to 7 hours if we want to. We won't fill it up to that limit at the beginning, of course. We'll just, once we're doing the testing. But yeah, the full-scale aircraft will be quite a lot bigger. I mean, talking 50 kilograms of the prototype to probably more than a ton for the full-scale aircraft. It's a third scale, but it's not a third in weight and not a third in budget either.
Wow, interesting. If you now think about the next 10 years, how does the world look like in 10 years if AeroDelft succeeds with your mission?
Yes, 10 years for aviation is quite an interesting question, because essentially it's tomorrow for the aviation world. It takes 10 years to develop an aircraft, especially when you're looking at or a full passenger aircraft, especially when you're looking at new technologies. I think, well, for AeroDelft, we want to have our full-scale aircraft, so the two-person aircraft, flying in 2023. After that, that'll be on gaseous hydrogen. After that, we'll focus on the liquid side of things again. So I think, what is that, 2025, I guess? We're looking quite short-term. For AeroDelft at least, because we can't really plan for much longer. The team changes every year, so we have new people coming in. So AeroDelft's vision is quite difficult to see. For me personally, I would say that from 10 years from now, I would expect that we see the first hydrogen-powered commercial aircraft flying, and I hope to be part of that. Whether it's working for a company like Airbus or whether we've set up our own spin-off, I think both of those are viable approaches. 10 years from now, I believe we'll have set up hydrogen infrastructure enough that we can fly these aircraft, at least from some hubs, and then such that in 5 years from then, so 2035, that we then see quite a lot more. And then if Airbus does bring in their zero-E projects between 2030 and 2035, we will then start to see a substantial amount of aircraft flying around with hydrogen. And that's very exciting. It's one of the reasons I think that sustainable aviation is probably the place to be for engineering, at least, because it's so exciting. There are so many things you can do. I mean, short term, if you think about aviation emissions, we can even think about how to reroute aircraft. We have the European single sky approach. If we can divert aircraft around climate-sensitive areas, we can even just reduce our fuel consumption by 10-15% already. There are so many things that we can do to reduce our emissions that I think 10 years from now, I'm pretty optimistic that we'll have made quite a big impact by then.
Thank you, Liam, for joining me today. It was really inspiring to hear what you can pull off with a bunch of part-time students and like a really ambitious vision for the future. And I wish you all the best for the upcoming test flights and prototype development. And thanks very much for joining.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, that's